Arizona Territory. 1879. The sun was high and unforgiving the moment she collapsed right there in the dirt outside Mason's trading post. Her bonnet slipping back, curls soaked in sweat, skirts tangled around her boots. Rhett Alder saw her fall from the seat of his chestnut gelding, about 20 feet off. He was just riding into town for salt and cartridges. Nothing more. But that changed in an instant. He was off his horse before the dust had even settled, boots pounding hard against the dry, packed earth. "Ma'am," he called, crouching beside her. "Miss, can you hear me?" She was pale, too pale and trembling. Her eyelids fluttered, dry lips parted. There was no blood, but something wasn't right. Rhett gathered her into his arms without a second thought, her weight light as a feather against his chest. "I need water," he shouted as he pushed open the trading post's swinging door with his shoulder. She fainted out front. Old Man Mason looked up from behind the counter, eyes wide as he grabbed a tin cup and filled it from the barrel. Rhett laid her on the bench near the stove, brushing damp hair from her forehead. Her skin was hot like fever. "Here." Mason handed over the cup. "Who is she?" "No idea," Rhett muttered, tipping the water gently against her lips. She coughed once, then blinked, her breath shallow. Her voice cracked. "I was bringing my children," her words broke off, and she lifted a hand weakly. "Where are they?" "Children?" Rhett asked. She tried to sit up. "I left them under the cottonwoods, maybe a mile back. I thought I could get help quick. I did not mean to fall. You have 2 children out in this heat." Rhett was already rising, jaw tight. "Which direction?" She pointed with a trembling hand, barely able to keep her eyes open. "East, past the dry creek bed. Please go. I will bring them back. You stay here. Mason, keep her inside. Cool her down best you can." Without another word, Rhett was gone back on his horse, kicking up a cloud of dust as he rode hard toward the direction she had pointed. The land was wide and empty, the sun beating down without mercy. He scanned the brush, the dead tree stumps, the brittle grass. Then movement, a flash of fabric. 2 children, crouched beneath a leaning cottonwood. A girl, maybe 6, holding a younger boy close. Both were flushed, their lips dry, eyes wide with fear. "Hey!" Rhett called softly as he rode in slow. "Your mama sent me. She fainted, but she is okay. I am here to take you to her." The girl nodded but did not speak. She helped her brother to his feet, and Rhett lifted them both in front of him on the saddle. "You 2 got names?" he asked gently. The girl looked up. "My name is Maybelle. He's Milo." "All right, Maybelle. Hold on tight." Back at the trading post, the woman was sitting up, drinking water in small sips. When she saw the children, her face crumpled with relief. "Come here, my babies," she whispered, arms stretched wide. Maybelle and Milo ran to her, and she wrapped them both against her chest, rocking slightly. Rhett leaned against the doorway, watching. She looked up at him after a moment. Her eyes were striking, even bloodshot and tired. "Thank you. I do not know what would have happened if you hadn't come." He took off his hat, giving her a slow nod. "You would have done the same." "I am Zadie Boone," she said, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead. "We came from Abilene. My husband died last winter. We had no one left. I sold what I could and thought maybe we could start again out here." Rhett crossed the room and crouched beside her. "You traveled this far alone with 2 kids?" There was no one else to help. He looked at her hands, calloused, scraped. Her shoes were worn to the sole. She had done this all on her own. "I am Rhett Alder," he said quietly. "You are safe now." Her eyes softened. "You carried me in here." He gave a small shrug. "You looked like you needed carrying." A faint smile tugged at her mouth, and something caught in Rhett's chest. He had not expected any of this today. But as he looked at her strong, brave, worn down but not broken, he knew something had shifted deep inside him. Mason cleared his throat from behind the counter. She needs rest. Let them stay the night here. I have extra blankets. Rhett stood and looked at Zadie. Let me help you more. I have a ranch quiet place west of here. Just me and 2 hands. You could rest there a few days. Get your strength back. Zadie's brows lifted. You do not know me. He met her eyes. I know enough. She looked at her children, then back at him. Only if you are sure. I am. That night, Rhett hitched a wagon and drove them out to his place. A small homestead with a cabin and a barn, nestled against a ridge of red rock. Zadie sat close beside him, Milo asleep in her lap, Maybelle leaning on her shoulder. The stars were sharp in the sky. The wind was quiet, and Rhett kept glancing over at her, his heart thudding harder than it had in years. He had carried her into the trading post, but she had already started carrying something inside of him, something he had not known he was missing. The cabin stood quiet beneath the morning light, its slanted roof casting a long shadow across the dry grass. A breeze stirred the curtains at the open window, carrying the scent of ash and sage from the cookstove where Rhett was splitting kindling with slow, practiced rhythm. Inside, Zadie lay still on the cot near the hearth, her children curled beside her under a faded quilt. Her breathing had steadied overnight, the flush of heat gone from her cheeks. She stirred only when the front latch creaked open and Rhett stepped in with a basin of creek water balanced in one hand. I boiled it, he said, setting it down on the side table. Cool now, but clean. Zadie pushed herself upright, careful not to wake the children. You went all the way to the creek this early? Only place with running water that's not brown. He reached for a clean rag. You look steadier this morning. She accepted the cloth and dipped it into the basin. Better, yes, though my legs still feel like they don't trust me. They'll come back to you. You pushed them too far for too long. Zadie pressed the damp cloth to her neck. I didn't have much choice. Rhett leaned against the doorway, arms folded. Where were you headed, exactly? I heard about a school opening in Bisbee. Someone said they were offering a little room for single mothers who could teach letters. I figured I'd try. You teach. I can read and write well enough, and I taught a few neighbor kids back in Abilene. I hoped that counted for something. He studied her for a moment. It does. Zadie glanced down at her hands. I don't want your pity. You've done more than enough already. This isn't pity. His voice was steady. Pity don't make a man ride through heat and dust for strangers. And it don't make a man offer his table and roof. She looked up at him then, eyes meeting his without flinching. There was something in his gaze that unsettled her stillness, but not indifference. A kind of patience that made no demands but left no room for pretending either. I'll help around here until we can move on, she said. I don't sit idle. He nodded once like he expected nothing less. I'll show you the root cellar after breakfast. There's onions that need checking. By the time the sun rose higher, Maybelle was outside helping Rhett's ranch hand. Caleb, gather eggs. Milo clung to Zadie's skirts as she swept the porch, blinking at the brightness. Caleb, a man of few words and long silences, crouched beside the chicken coop and muttered something to Maybelle that made her laugh. Zadie paused at the sound, her hand tightening on the broom. Rhett came up the slope from the barn, a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. She's not shy, that girl of yours. She takes after her father, Zadie said, brushing dust from the hem of her skirt. He could charm a mule into dancing. Rhett set the rope down and looked at her. You talk about him easy. I've had enough time to make peace, she said. He was good with the children. He worked hard. But he didn't have the kind of steadiness a family needs when times turn mean. He leave before? No, she said, voice softening. He stayed. But he stayed like a man caught in a current. Always trying to swim up out of it, never quite making it to the shore. Rhett nodded, not pushing for more. You ever think about staying in one place again? Sometimes, she said, eyes drifting toward the open land. But I don't trust stillness yet. It's where things tend to break. He stepped closer, voice low. Not always. Zadie looked up at him, the breeze pulling strands of hair across her face. You built this place with your hands? My father gave me the land. Everything else I made myself or traded for. Took a while. I can see that, she said. It holds together. It's meant to. They stood there a moment, neither rushing to fill the quiet. Then Milo tugged at her sleeve, holding up a small stone he'd found near the fence. She knelt beside him, brushing dirt from his cheek, and Rhett saw it the way her hand lingered, the way her voice gentled. That evening, after the children were asleep and the sky had gone violet at the edges, Zadie stepped out onto the porch where Rhett was mending tack by lantern light. I don't mean to presume, she said, folding her arms across her chest. But if you ever needed help with the house or the cooking, I could offer that. He glanced up at her, the lantern casting gold across his features. You already do more than most would. I don't want to take without giving back. You're not. She hesitated. Then maybe I'm trying to earn my place here. For a little while. You don't have to earn space, Zadie, he said quietly. You just have to want it. Something in her chest ached at that. She looked out across the land, toward the ridge where the last of the sunlight caught on stone. I'm not used to people meaning what they say. He set the leather strap down. Then I suppose I'll have to prove it. She turned to him, her face soft in the lantern glow. You think we'll find room for that in this life? I do, he said, voice steady. I think there's room for more than you've had. Zadie stepped closer, close enough to smell the saddle soap on his hands. I don't scare easy, Rhett, but I'm tired of being let down. I don't let down what I carry. He didn't reach for her, didn't move, just waited. She gave the smallest nod, barely more than breath. And then she sat beside him on the bench, close, their shoulders almost touching. They said nothing more that night, but the silence held something new, something beginning. Rhett had never paid much mind to the sound of a woman humming in the kitchen. But that morning, as he pulled on his boots in the lean daylight, he heard Zadie's voice low and tuneless, threading through the cabin's quiet. It wasn't a melody so much as a rhythm, steady as her hands kneading dough behind the table. He stepped out onto the porch and sat on the edge of the top stair, elbows resting on his knees. The air was cool still, touched by dew, and the land stretched wide and undisturbed. Caleb had taken the wagon into town before first light, off to collect seed and tobacco. Rhett had offered to go himself, but Zadie had said she wasn't ready to be left alone with the children. Not yet. Not with the way the land still felt unfamiliar beneath her feet. Inside, the rustle of flour and firewood, the soft patter of Maybelle asking questions about measurements, and Zadie answering with patience braided through weariness. Rhett let the sounds settle around him. They made the place feel fuller, lived in a way it hadn't before. When the door creaked behind him, he looked over his shoulder. Zadie stepped out barefoot, rubbing flour from her fingers with a damp cloth. Biscuits'll be ready soon, she said, looking past him toward the corral. Milo's still sleeping. He nodded. Let him. He was dragging his feet yesterday. Zadie leaned against the porch post, arms crossed loose at her waist. He misses the sound of wagons, the way town used to hum in the morning. You miss it too? Not the noise, she said. But sometimes I miss not being noticed, moving through a crowd where no one's waiting on you. He looked up at her. There's room here to disappear if you want it. I don't, she said, her voice firm. Not anymore. She stepped down into the yard, her skirt brushing the tops of her ankles. Rhett followed. They walked side by side toward the paddock, dry grass crunching beneath their feet. The horses stood still, tails flicking, eyes watching. I've been thinking, she said, resting her hands on the fence rail. Maybelle's quick with numbers. She's never had a real slate or primer, but she picks up patterns fast. Gets that from you? No, she said. Her father could read a ledger in half the time I could. And Milo, he's got ears like a fox. He hears things I miss. Rhett reached for a piece of straw from the fence post and turned it between his fingers. They've been through more than most. Makes them pay closer attention. Zadie nodded. I want to give them more than just survival. You're doing that now. I want to give them steadiness, she said. Not just shelter. Rhett studied her face, not the lines of strain, but something beneath it. A kind of reckoning. Like she'd come through a storm and wasn't sure yet if the ground would hold. I've got a schoolbook in the loft, he said. Left behind by my sister when she passed. It's old, but the words hold. Zadie turned to him. You had a sister? Lila. She died the year the rains failed. Fever took most of the valley. We buried her under the cottonwood out back. She was 21. I'm sorry. I was 17, he said, voice steady. She raised me after Ma passed. That book was the only thing she wouldn't trade or burn. Zadie didn't speak, but her gaze lingered on him, soft with understanding, not pity. She reached out and took the piece of straw from his hand, twirling it once before letting it fall. I'd like to see it. He nodded. I'll bring it down after supper. They turned back toward the house, walking slow. The sun had started to climb higher, casting long shadows behind them. When they reached the porch, Zadie paused at the steps. Rhett, she said, her voice quieter now. Do you believe in second lives? Not after death. Just after everything you thought you'd be is gone. I believe we get to choose some things again, he said. If we're willing to stand still long enough to see what's left. She tilted her head, studying him. And if what's left is better than what came before? Then we build on it, he said. One board at a time. She didn't smile, but her eyes held something steadier than hope, something anchored. Inside, the biscuits had started to brown, and Milo's small feet patted across the floorboards. But Zadie lingered a moment longer on the porch, her fingers brushing the doorframe, grounding herself. Rhett stood beside her, not touching, not speaking, just present. And in that silence, something shifted again, not sudden, not sharp, just a settling, like two people finding the same rhythm without asking the other to change their pace. The schoolbook Rhett had mentioned sat on the table now, its corners softened by time but the spine still strong. Zadie ran her fingers over the faded cover that evening, careful as if touching something sacred. Maybelle leaned over the pages, eyes wide, mouthing the letters under her breath. Rhett watched from the doorway, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, arms dusted with hay from the loft. Zadie glanced up. She's already asking about the harder words. She gets that from you, Rhett said. She gets it from wanting more than what we had. He stepped closer, voice quiet. Well, now she's got it. Zadie closed the book and held Maybelle's hand a moment before sending her off to help Caleb bring in the wash. When the door shut behind the girl, she turned to Rhett. Your sister had a careful hand, she said, tapping the margin where neat notes had been penciled in beside a passage. She must have loved the quiet work. She always said books were steadier than people. Zadie looked at him for a moment, then turned back to the book. She was right in a way. They stood in silence, just the sound of wind brushing against the cabin wall. Rhett pulled out a chair and Saturday, You said you used to teach neighbors' children. What made you take it up? I was 10 when a drifter stayed with us for a week. She sat across from him, folding her hands. He'd fought near Vicksburg, and he carried a satchel full of papers, maps, letters, a reader. My father gave him supper in exchange for a story each night. On the last night, he taught me to read the word lantern. I never forgot the shape of it. You tell Maybelle that story? Not yet, she said. Maybe when she's older, when she can understand how something small can mark you for a lifetime. Rhett leaned back, the legs of his chair creaking. You think about teaching again? Not just for your own. Zadie didn't answer right away. She picked at a splinter on the table's edge, then looked up. If I stay here long enough, maybe I could. But I'd need a place for it. A proper space. He nodded slowly. I've got an old shed near the orchard. Was my pa's tack room. Roof's half good. And the door still swings. Could clean it out. She tilted her head. Why would you give up space like that? Because there's more to build here than fences. She studied him then, not with wonder but something quieter recognition. I'd need slates, chalk, a bench or two. I've got lumber. Caleb can shape it. I'll trade for the rest when I go into Bisbee next. You're serious. I don't say what I won't do. She looked down at her hands. Rhett, I've been carried before. Promises made when it was easy to make them. I've learned not to lean too far on something that might shift. He reached across the table, not touching, just placing his hand palm down beside hers. Then don't lean. Stand beside me. The wind caught the edge of the curtain, and somewhere outside, a fence gate clicked shut. Zadie sat back, her breath slow. Would you want more than that? She asked. He didn't look away. Eventually, but I can wait. She nodded once, then rose and walked to the window. The moonlight caught her profile, the slope of her jaw, the soft pull of her mouth. I used to think I had to earn rest, she said. That I had to break myself down to deserve something steady. And now, I don't want to feel like a guest in my own life anymore. Rhett stood, moved to her side. You're not. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned slightly, the air between them drawing tight. Her hand found his shirt just above the waist, fingers curling as if testing whether he'd pull away. He didn't. Outside, the night deepened. Inside, Zadie stepped into the space between them, slow and sure. Her forehead rested lightly against his chest, and he wrapped one arm around her back, the other settling at her hip with the ease of someone who'd waited without expectation. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stood there, held steady in a house that no longer felt borrowed. And Rhett, who had once built his life around silence and fences, let the moment root itself without question. Because sometimes it wasn't the saving that mattered most. Sometimes it was what you did once the saving was done. The shed behind the orchard took 3 days to gut and 4 more to make right. Rhett cleared it himself, sawing out the warped shelves, hauling mold-soft tack out to burn. Caleb patched the roof with shingles they had stored in the barn rafters, and Maybelle painted the door a dull green with leftover wagon paint, her tongue pressed to the side of her mouth in concentration. Zadie spent the mornings with Milo, sewing a curtain from old calico for the single window, and shaping letters into the dust with his finger when he grew restless. There was no rush in the work, no strain, just the kind of pace that held. By the 8th day, shelves lined the left wall, holding jars of chalk and an ink pot Rhett had traded for in Bisbee. 2 benches stood facing a narrow table, and behind it, Zadie had tacked a stitched sampler that read, "Patience is a root that bears quiet fruit." That afternoon, Rhett found her in the doorway of the shed, wiping her palms on her apron. The curtain fluttered behind her, softening the light inside. "She's ready," she said. He nodded. "Looks like a place worth sitting in." I never pictured it so still, she said, stepping back to let him in. Most places I've taught were loud, borrowed rooms. This one feels like it's waiting. He ran a hand along the bench. It was never meant to hold saddles anyway. Maybelle ran in then, cheeks flushed, holding a bundle of wildflowers. Mama, can we put these on the table? For the first day, Zadie smiled. Only if you arrange them yourself, just like we practiced. As the girl knelt at the table, Milo crawled up beside her, humming under his breath. Zadie leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching the two of them. Rhett stood beside her, his voice low. They look like they've been here all their lives. They'll remember this, she said. Not just the place, the feeling. He hesitated, then stepped closer, his arm brushing hers. You'll stay, then? She turned to him, her eyes steady. I've been waiting to feel rooted. Turns out it's not the land. It's who stands beside you. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Instead, he lifted her hand in his, thumb brushing over the knuckle. Her hand stayed where it was, warm in his grasp. That night, after the children had gone to bed and the fire had burned low, Zadie stood in the kitchen doorway, drying her hands. Rhett was sitting at the table, turning a carving knife slowly between his fingers. I've been thinking, she said, about the space behind the barn. He looked up. The flat stretch near the cottonwoods? There's enough room for a garden. Beans, maybe. Squash in the fall. I could manage it. He set the knife down. You'd be planting roots. I already have. She crossed the room and sat beside him, resting her hand on his thigh, her touch light but certain. He reached for her waist, pulling her gently closer, forehead touching hers. I never knew quiet could feel like this, she whispered. It's not quiet, he said. It's peace. She closed her eyes, and he kissed her then, soft and sure, like something long overdue. There was no urgency, no hesitation, just the simple truth of it, slow and deep. When she pulled back, her smile was small but certain. I want this, a life. With you. Then it's yours, he said. Whatever days were given. The next spring, the schoolhouse opened its door to 4 more children from nearby homesteads. Zadie taught reading in the morning, numbers in the afternoon, and every pupil left with calloused fingers and a steady hand. Rhett built a second bench, then a third. Caleb carved a bell from iron scraps, and Milo rang it every morning with solemn pride. Maybelle helped Zadie copy lessons onto slate, her handwriting growing sharper by the week. On Sundays, they walked to the cottonwood where Rhett had buried his sister, and Zadie laid fresh blossoms at the base without saying a word. He never asked her to. She just knew. By the end of that year, the garden behind the barn had taken root. Rows of beans climbing up twine, squash swelling under broad leaves. Rhett added a room to the cabin, wide enough for a cradle if ever they needed it. One evening in late summer, as the heat began to lift and the shadows lengthened across the ridge, Rhett took Zadie's hand and led her to the porch steps. They watched the children chase fireflies through the tall grass, their laughter easy and bright. He turned to her, brushing a curl from her cheek. I used to think I'd live alone till I was dust. You would have done fine, she said. Maybe. But now I know what it's like to build something that stays. She leaned into him. So do I. They sat there until the stars came out, arms wrapped around each other, the sound of home settling around them. Nothing undone, nothing uncertain. Just the quiet strength of 2 people who had walked through loss and found not just shelter, but each other. And in that stillness they stayed. Always.